Okay. So today I've asked Nancy Langton, who is the co-convener of this travel group, to take over the meeting and to introduce me and get me started. So over to you, Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Welcome, everyone, to this session of the Emeritus Travel Group. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that I live on the unceded and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. I expect that many of you are also in these territories, and some of you may also be elsewhere. Today, Paul Steinbok is going to give a talk on his tour of Iceland and Greenland that he went on in July 2024. I'm particularly looking forward to this because I'm going to Greenland in this July, so I want to see what Paul did. I'll ask Paul to introduce himself and start the talk. And then, Paul, you can share your screen. Meanwhile, I'll ask the rest of you to please try to mute yourself so that we don't have any interference during Paul's talk. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Nancy. Well, I am a Professor Emeritus of Surgery and Neurosurgeon, Pediatric Neurosurgeon, and I've been convening these travel group meetings for the last couple of years now. So I'm going to just share my screen and try to get started. Let's see how it works here. I want to share screen two. Screen sharing. Can you see my screen now? Okay,
Yes.
excellent. Thank you. So as Nancy said, this was a trip that we did last summer. And what we did was a Viking ocean cruise. And we started in Reykjavik down here and went around the whole island of Iceland in 1 week, 7 nights. It was called Iceland's Natural Beauty was the name of the trip. And we started in Reykjavik. I got there a day and a half before the cruise started and had time to look around the town and take a tour of our own. This is down by the water and one of the most famous buildings there called the Harpa. This building is a music hall, it's a convention hall, it's a cultural place, and it's beautiful outside, pretty striking, and it's beautiful inside, and well worth a visit both out and in. And then there's lots of walking you can do along the water and close by. Here is going up toward the cathedral. It's the famous landmark, the high point of Reykjavik. And you can see two views of the cathedral here. And there's this famous hot dog stand in the center of Reykjavik. And we had to visit it, and most people visit it because President Clinton visited this hot dog stand in August of 2004. Now, while we were there having hot dogs, we overheard a tour guide talking to a group of tourists, and she mentioned the fact that Clinton had had a hot dog here, and Clinton decided that he was not going to do what the Icelandic people typically did, was put all kinds of stuff on their hot dog. He just wanted mustard, and that was fine. But he proclaimed that this hot dog was the best hot dog he'd ever had. And the tour guide said, and you know that Mr. Clinton never lies. Anyhow, we had hot dogs here.
That's right.
And as you walk along the water, there's this beautiful, quite large life-size sculpture of a ship, canoe kind of ship called the Sun Voyager. Right opposite this sculpture, just a few meters down away from the Harpa, we have this building, which is where President Reagan met with Gorbachev and had a summit in what is called a Hoffel House in October of 1986. So you see here in Reykjavik, we've had two presidents who've made an impact. I visited the National Museum, which is very close to the University of Iceland, and you'll see that here's the campus. It's nothing like the beauty of our campus at UBC. It's pretty ordinary, the building, but this is what it is. But the museum itself, which is next door, is very interesting museum to visit. Now, just about everybody, and we did it too, visits the Blue Lagoon, the thermal pool. It's actually not a natural thermal pool, it's a pool fed by runoff water from one of their thermal production sites for steam and energy. And I would strongly recommend that if you only want to visit one pool, you don't visit the Blue Lagoon. It's a bit of a tourist trap. You're forced to buy a package with drinks. It takes a while to get a drink. And it's, to me, unless you have some skin disease, which you think might be cured by sitting in this water, it's better to go to Sky Lagoon, which is much closer to downtown Reykjavik. And it's a prettier place to go inside and have the visit with the lagoon. I obviously have misplaced my picture of the inside of this lagoon. One of the tours that we did off from the ship itself was to visit this open air museum, which is like a folk museum with a bit of the type of buildings in old Iceland, churches. Inside the church, you see at the top, to do with the fishing industry also, shows how people used to live. And this lady who guided us, she was dressed in typical Icelandic, old Icelandic clothes. Here again, we can see part of this open air museum. We can see the type of buildings with a sod roof and grass growing, and some of the implements for cooking inside. I was there with Edie, my wife, and my brother from Barbados and his wife, and another brother from Barbados and his wife. There were 6 of us who went on the ship. And we took a 1-day tour before we went on the ship called a Golden Circle Tour, which I'd arranged myself. And we started at our hotel and ended at the ship. And I show you this sculpture of Ingolfur Arnason, person who first settled in Reykjavik in 874. And I purposely show you this sculpture because the driver of our vehicle took us around for the day, claimed, and probably was correct, that he was a direct descendant from this particular person. 46 generations removed, but he said he was a direct descendant. And he was a very proud Icelandic man. So we went by the geothermal activity that Iceland is famous for, looking at some of the natural things, and you can see the pipes, and I'll point them out here, taking hot water down toward Reykjavik to heat the different houses. We passed some beautiful lakes and ended up in Thingvellir. This is where the first parliament of Iceland was held, in this area. It's also an area where we're at the rift between the Eurasian and the North American plates. And we're standing right now on the North American side and looking over here toward the Eurasian side. And this is the valley in between these two plates. Some people like to tell the tourists that if you stand like this, as my brother is standing at this place, that you have 1 foot in America and 1 foot in Europe. It's not true. It's just a little rift in the rock, but this is not the rift. What I showed you before is how big the gap between the two plates really is. But as I said, the first parliament was held in this area, called the Althingi, was held in 930 CE, at a place called the Law Rock. And where this flag is on the right-hand side is apparently where the original Law Rock was. The different groups of people who lived in Iceland would come together and they would make laws at this area. They would have judgments on different crimes and so on. And this is where people came together in June, on June the 17th of 1944, to found the Republic, when Iceland became independent of Denmark at that point in time. And it was a big deal. Lots of people came. If you go to the museum, you'll see the whole history of this founding of the Republic. Apparently, it was an awful day. It was cold. It was wet, even though it was June. But people were happy to be there, soaking wet anyhow. But as I said, judgments were handed down. And the men, if they had a major crime, were decapitated or hanged. The women, however, didn't suffer that fate. They were drowned. And right in this area, there was a pool in this little river where women were put to death by drowning. And their crimes included adultery, incest, and infanticide. And then we went off to visit a variety of waterfalls. This is the golden waterfall, Gullfoss. And you can see it close up here. And Iceland is famous for a variety of different waterfalls. Faxafoss, Faxi waterfall, another one. And then we went to see the geysers, the Stroker geyser, and the geyser geothermal area. The Great Geyser, which is where the word geyser takes its name from, is now inactive, but it lent its name to all others across the world. But there is a Stroker geyser that's very active, and so this is it erupting. And here we have on the left-hand side, we're waiting, and then on the right-hand side it erupts. And then we carried on along our tour past the old volcanic crater, which is now has a lake in it. And this is the Kerrid crater, which you can walk around the rim of it. And it's just beautiful as you walk around. And you can see the people down here. They've come down to get an idea of how big this is. And then we ended up back at our ship, and we then boarded our ship at that time afterwards. So we started our cruise. And as I said, we're going to go from Reykjavik, and the first stop is going to be Icefjord. And here's our ship docked at Icefjord. And we went on a tour for the most of the day to an island called Viger Island. And here we're on a motorboat heading toward the island. And the light there is just quite spectacular. It's a different kind of colors up in this area, as you can see here. And beautiful reflections. It's a beautiful sunny day. It's just reflections in the water as we're traveling. Different mountain ranges. And we reached the island. And the island is owned by this guy, who is the only person who lives there. And he comes to greet us and takes us on a bit of a tour of the island. It's like an old fishing area with lots of birds. There are eiders, and this eider, he has eider's nest there, and in a building, he has eider down from these birds, the eiders. Lots of black guillemots. And then this bird flying toward us is an Arctic tern, and they're all over the place. This bird, many of you might know, is the bird that flies the longest distance for its migration. It flies from the Arctic to the Antarctic and then back. And it feeds on little shrimp, and the bird on the right has a little shrimp in its beak, as you can see here. And on the other side of this island, there's a puffin colony, but most of the puffins had gone, but we did get to see a few puffins while we were there. And they were in the grass, like this grassy area here. They would fly and have some nest in this area. So once we got back to um, the place where we were docked, we had time to go on a walk into the little village there, past some uh, boats, some sailboats, fishing boats. I like the colors of the boats and the metal stuff. It's beautiful. Lots of jellyfish were in the water. And the town itself was pretty spectacular. And on the way out, right by the side of the road, was a whole bunch of plantains. These are ice plants. It was quite pretty. So we're back on the ship and we go next to Akureyri. And here we went on a tour, a bus tour, taking us first to this waterfall called Godafoss, which is the waterfall of the gods. Couple of views of the waterfall. Yes, we were there, not just photographs. And then we went to this high temperature geothermal area called Namafjalviri. I can't pronounce the term properly, but we'll see some fumaroles and mud pots and steam everywhere. Like here, it's a very strange place to walk around. You have to make sure you don't walk where you shouldn't walk. There's a path that you can take, but there's steam coming out of the ground everywhere. All of these bubbling water that's steaming. Here is mud bubbling. There's a, and this is a fumarole where there's steam coming out above ground from this hillock, as it were, of rocks. And then another part of it looks like you're on a different world, a different planet perhaps. And apparently, astronauts have come here to train for some of their missions because it's supposed to be like it's extraterrestrial. And from there, we went to a different area. We passed this old volcano that's now like a crater and ended up in Dimmuborgir. And Dimmuborgir is an interesting place with very strange volcanic rock formations. And this happened because there were a series of volcanoes, all of these here, that erupted. The area here was all a lake. The lava flowed into this lake, immediately solidified in the cold water, and created these very strange shapes of lava rock. And so you can see here, and you can fantasize and say, well, I can see up at the top here, this looks like some gnome of some sort. Over here, I don't know if you can see it. I can't see it properly because this is covering. I'll move this. Okay. Here we can see Romeo and Juliet. Here we can see some kind of animal like a rodent. And there are the interesting rock formations. Here you can see the size of this hole in the rock and the size of the rock with the people there. And there are lots of trees called, then they're birch trees. Primarily, that's one of the natural trees that they have. Forest of birch trees, quite common in Iceland. And the birch trees are not very tall. And the Icelandic people say that if you get lost while you're walking in the forest, all you need to do is stand up. And if you stand up, you will be able to see above the trees. And because they're birch trees, I was on the lookout for birch mushrooms, and indeed there were birch mushrooms. Here we can see one of these. These are edible mushrooms. We have them in Vancouver. I picked them on the way to the hospital where I work. There are many of these during in the fall season, and they're easy to identify. They're called the Sinum scabrum, and they eat them there also. I asked, yes. We found the national flower of Iceland. It was late in the season for this flower, so they're not as beautiful as they can be. They're mountain avens, or Holtasoli, they call them in Iceland. From there, we moved on to visit another place where there are lakes and old volcanoes. And everywhere in Iceland, there are volcanoes. And here are some of the remnants of previously erupted volcanoes with lakes around them. And here we saw Icelandic horses, group of them. It's what they look like. They're not very big horses. And from there, we moved on to our next stop at Icefjord. And here we're coming in toward this little town. And early in the morning, that's a beautiful entrance. It almost reminded me of a group of seven painting. And some of the little fishing piers, docks. And finally into the main town where we're docked. And from the rear of the ship, we could look down and there was this old boat that was there that I thought was quite interesting. And from the front of the ship, we could look down at the whole town with a little bit of a pond and then the ocean to the right. And so we went for a tour, a walking tour from the ship. And one of the things that was pointed out to us were these structures, and they're here to prevent snow with this avalanche from coming down or rocks from coming down. It's one of their protective devices. And there's this blue church, these buildings, and the buildings are all quite interesting because all of these buildings are prefabricated buildings that came here from Norway or Denmark, from Norway mainly actually. And they all came like this in the box, prefabricated as it were, and they were just put up. And even the biggest buildings were like this. I passed this beautiful flower with Eryntium alpinum, a blue star. But here's the school, and it's prefabricated building in Norway. And then we have the street going from the church. Kids were playing in the water. It was a beautiful day. And we had a little folk concert with two singers, guitar player, with some typical Icelandic snacks to go with the concert. And then we carried on walking on the other side of this pond through this very strange front yard of this person's house to visit another waterfall. This is a very small waterfall. The alpine lupins that are now all over were introduced here and they've taken over. And now we're back on the ship off to beautiful sunset after dinner. And we're now heading to Djúpivogur. And as we come in early in the morning, there's fog banks over the water. And we didn't spend any time in Djúpivogur because what we did, we went from the town itself to Hofen and then to visit an outflow glacier just south of Hofen. So we'll show you that. And here is from the bus. We're traveling along the coast. And this part of the water is sort of protected. The main sea is out to the left. And there's a large area where the water comes in, but it's not part of the main water. There's a break that out here somewhere there's land that protects this area. And we stopped at Hofen for a washroom break. And little walk around, and they have this unicorn memorial here. And then we're off to this outflow glacier. Now, there's a big glacier, huge glacier in the center of Iceland. And coming from these glaciers, there are these outflows that go to the ocean. And they're all called outflow glaciers, and there are many of them. And uh, there are icebergs in the water, and this is still in the protected water, so it's not the open ocean that we're in right now. And we got to go in zodiacs and go and ride around among the icebergs, visiting the glacier up close, some of the icebergs, and here Edie and I and our group of 6 of us who traveled together. On the way back, we passed a lot of farmland. There were cows, there were sheep. And at this time of the year, there are these whooper swans that they overwinter in the UK, and then they come to Iceland, and they were walking over the road up in the side of the mountains, but most of them were in the water. And some interesting rock formations. And then we made one stop at the to have a look along the ocean itself, to look at what it was like as we almost approaching where our ship was. So we went from Djúpivogur to the Westman Islands down at the southern part of Iceland to visit Heimaey. And here we had to tender into the dock. And as we were coming in, there were these birds flying all around and interesting rocks and bird nests. You can see here the seagulls. And when we arrived at the dock, this is our guide, local guide, and he took this bird out of a box. And this is a baby puffin, called a puffling. And these pufflings get mixed up, or their mothers get mixed up and leave them be because of the lights in the town. And the locals run around picking up the pufflings, put them in a box, and then during the day they throw them back into the water where they really should be. So he showed us one of these things that he had in his box that they would release later on into the water. So we went on a walking tour, and there was a big volcano in January of 1973, and it's called the Eldfell volcano, and it came from this mountain here, and this eruption destroyed half of the town. And the sign here points to this street. The town used to come from here along to where I am standing, but this is all lava, now covered with grass. And this part of the town remained intact. So from there, we were fortunate. We decided to call a taxi, and we can get a taxi that would take all 6 of us together with a driver. And we wanted to visit a puffin colony that was the biggest puffin colony in this area, and where they had lots of puffins still present. And indeed, when we got there and got out, there were birds flying around. There were all puffins flying around everywhere. As you can see here, and looking at some of them in flight, and lots of them, of course, on the grass here. It's a very good place to get pictures of puffins. And our lady driver pointed out to us this rock, which she says is elephant rock. And maybe difficult to know what elephant she's talking about. Different people saw different elephants, like maybe this is the elephant's trunk. But the one that most people think is this, which if I blow up, is like the elephant's eye and the trunk hanging down into the water. Okay, so that was the end of our trip to Iceland. We came back to Reykjavik, and then we did an extension after the 7-day tour. We arranged to go with Viking on their extension from Iceland to Greenland. And we flew from Reykjavik here to the western side of Greenland, to Ilulissat. And as we were coming into Greenland, this is what it looked like. And we got over, it was just ice and snow, and the mountain tips were showing. And we started to come down into Ilulissat to the airport. And we can see one of the expedition ships and all the icebergs around. And from our hotel, the patio of the dining room, we could look down here and have a nice overview of a part of Ilulissat. And again, we can see the tongues right on the water, the expedition ship, the icebergs in the water. And particularly for me, I was interested, this is the hospital. The emergency room is right here. The ambulance, and here's the emergency area. Here's where people come in, bring patients. And there's this interesting church down by the water. So we got a tour, we walked down by the water, and we could do this on our own from our hotel to get down here. Only takes about 10 minutes anyhow, if you don't want to stop and look around. But it's a pleasant walk. Church, they say, from 1779 originally. And you'll see two scooters here, skateboards. Here are some of the kids who had left those behind. And they didn't mind me taking their photographs. I asked if it was okay. And they said yes. And this boy particularly, he wanted his photograph taken. He posed. You can see him here. He really was somewhat photogenic. Other kids were playing. There were some little kayaks drying up here. One interesting iceberg that we found. Came back the next day, this was completely gone. These are apartment buildings, and there are many that look very similar as you walk around Ilulissat. And they're pretty similar, basic looking, but I'll show you inside one of them later on. And here we can see this white flowers closer up. Closer. It's cotton grass, very common in this area. Lots of rocks with lichen on it. And then this is the main harbor. And it's divided into different sections. These are obviously for pleasure boats, close to where the bridge is. And if you go on the bridge and stand looking back the other way, you can see the exit from this harbor. The pleasure boats first, then the fishing boats, then the bigger ships further out, going toward the icebergs. And so at sunset, we went on a trip from here in to visit the ice fields. There are fishing boats, as I said, and this man was just baiting his fishing line. And you can see the fish he's put on this hook here. Some old buildings that were interesting, you know. And then off to visit the icebergs. And here we're in our little small motorboat, like this one here, among these huge towering icebergs, ice brash, different blocks of ice caves, almost like sculptures in the ice side of the icebergs. And then we saw whales. And our final picture of an iceberg. all different kinds of shapes and hues. So the next day morning, we were off to visit the Icefjord Center and go for a walk on land to have a look at the ice fields from the land side. This is a museum, this Icefjord Center, and it's made by the architect to apparently look like the wing of a snow owl. And there's a path that you can walk on, which is wood, boardwalk. And as we walk, here is an interesting area with moss. And the moss is just beautiful. Look at the right-hand side picture. The moss is so different colors, types of moss. And then it goes down to the water, and you can see the ice fields with the icebergs. And again, you can see like where we were before with this boat among the huge icebergs. And this was the end of our trail. And we got to sit here for a while, have a cup of hot chocolate, and just enjoy looking at the ice fields. Some of the people went back along the boardwalk, and some of us, and me included, decided to go on a hike around the land area, having different views of the icebergs. Again, the colors in the sky and on the ice is just quite beautiful. So here we are on the trail. Our guide, who is from Denmark. And this pile of rocks here with the blue on it, it's a trail marker. And all the markers were in blue, tell you how to stay on the trail, because the trail is not a proper, well-marked trail by itself. You could easily go in different directions. And there are lots of wildflowers. And I'll show you some of them. Harebells, campanula, pygmy stonecrop. And these are crowberries. These are edible, and we were allowed to eat them. They're not the tastiest berry in the world. They're not very juicy, fairly bland taste, but we did have them with our meals in the hotel restaurant. So they do use them. And this is red campion, Arctic mouse ear, it's called. And this is the national flower of Greenland, dwarf fireweed. They call it Niviarthiac, Cimmerian latifolium. More lichen on rocks. And there's a cemetery here overlooking the water among the rocks. And when we finished our trail, we came outside the area. There's an area where they have all of these huskies that here we are in the summer, so they're just waiting for the winter, basically. They do nothing during the summer except live and get fed. But they're chained, they can't go anywhere too far. And one of the things that Viking tends to do and did on this trip is to have us have a cultural experience of some sort. And we got to visit a home in Greenland, Inuit home. And this lady allowed us into her home. Her actual house her apartment that she was in, got burnt down recently. And so they put her up in this temporary housing. And she told us her life story. She is one of the few Inuit people, who decided that she wanted a better education and better life for herself. And so she actually left Ilulissat. She got a scholarship to go to Copenhagen. She went there, she studied, she became a social worker. She went to a variety of conferences in different parts of Europe. And she came back and practiced as a social worker in Ilulissat. As she told us at the time, just about everybody in her family, her sisters, her brothers, and the brothers would become fishermen, the sisters would marry fishermen, and they would just do housework. And she wanted to do more than that. So she left and got an education. But she still does her local handicrafts. She makes these boots for all her family members to wear and different clothes for ceremonies that they perform. And she showed us the things that she made and allowed us into her house, as you see. And one of the things that we noticed is that in this place that she is her temporary quarters, if you look, you'll see the refrigerator. It's Miele. Dishwasher is Miele. They're pretty high-end appliances that these people have. And the government apparently looks after them quite well and provides them with subsidies for their houses and good quality accommodation, as you can see here, quite modern. So after our visit to this person, a little time to look around, it was time to leave Greenland and go back to Iceland where we came back. And we're back on our trip back toward Reykjavik. And that's where we finished. I came back to Vancouver. So I'll stop screen sharing and hand it back over to Nancy.
Thank you, Paul, for a very interesting
Thank
account
you.
of your trip, and your photos were just beautiful. And so I really feel like I do have a sense of the country a little bit. Let me open this now for questions. Do people want to ask questions of Paul?
Sure, Paul. This is Jim. I went to a couple of times to Iceland, and when I was there, people talked about the belief in trolls. Did you ever encounter that when you were visiting?
Yes, and in fact, I should have said so, but the when we were at the place where they had all these funny looking lava rock, one of the things that I showed you, they said looked like a troll. Them it looked like a troll. So they didn't have much talk about the significance of trolls when I was there, but they did mention this particular rock formation.
Paul Harrison, you have a question?
Hi, thanks. Paul, I really want to thank you for uh, this past year and coordinated all of these wonderful talks, and ending with your very interesting talk. I wonder, did you find out in uh, Green Iceland whether the glaciers are melting as fast as they are in Greenland?
They are, and it's an issue. But you know, one of the things that we learned when we were in Iceland is that when the first people came there in 900s, the 10th century, Iceland was a much warmer place than it is now. And it was actually considered a wonderful place to grow crops. And over the next hundreds of years, it became colder and colder and colder and less hospitable than it was when they first settled in Iceland. And so some people are saying that perhaps we're going through a natural cycle, that we were warm, we gradually got colder, and now we're starting to get warmer again. But the scientists in Iceland, we discussed this with our driver guide, claim that things are melting even faster than they would have expected if they were going through a natural cycle. So they do believe in climate change and have a concern about climate change there.
Thank you.
Paul, I had a question about the first little island that you visited where there was just one guy living.
Yes.
And there were a number of buildings. So what is the purpose of that island, or what is he doing?
I he has some sheep. He has like a farm. He has birds there. He collects down from the eiders. One building he just has eiders who nest there in his building and gets the down from them. So I don't know that all of them are his, but he and I think he has a wife also there that he lives there with. I don't. We went and we had coffee or tea or something like that as part of the tour. I guess coffee and cakes. Somebody created all of those things for us, not just this one guy. But he took us on a bit of a tour. Apparently, he owns the island.
Amazing.
I have a couple of questions too, if I could.
Sure.
Thanks, Paul, for sharing your photos. First of all, usually when I see pictures of Iceland, it's just volcanoes and waterfalls. So it's nice to see more of what the rest of the island actually looks like. I noticed a lot of birds. You took
Yes.
a lot of nice bird photos, but I was just wondering, is there any other wildlife there? I didn't see anything, any animals or are there wildlife around?
Well, there are whales, of course, but there is some wildlife, and I can't remember what they're Arctic foxes, which we didn't see any of, and I think there may be a couple of other wild animals, but not many wild animals there. They're domestic animals. They're the horses. There's lots of sheep, and big population of sheep actually, and they make, of course, they shear the wool and they make woolen products from them. But they have cows, no, and they actually are almost self-sufficient when it comes to vegetables and these kinds of things because they have these greenhouses that they heat with their geothermal energy, which is cheap, and so they produce vegetables throughout the year in their massive greenhouses, apparently.
I may have missed it. You probably said so earlier, but when were you there? What dates?
We were there in July,
Last July?
last July.
Okay, great, thanks.
DJ,
I'm
you
interested in the physical nature of ice and the fact that only a small percentage is above the water and the rest is underwater. I forget the ratio 1 to 8 or something like
Yeah.
that. But I noticed that a lot of icebergs seem to be floating right up close to the beaches or to the edge of the land, which must indicate that those ice floes are sitting on the bottom of the river or the ocean. I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that, but how deep they go. They should go quite a lot deeper than we see above.
Yeah, they really do because ice is much lighter than the water it comes from, eh?
And I know that the evening that we went out on our boat, the channel into where those pleasure ships are and the fishing vessels that I showed you had a big iceberg blocking their way out. I don't know if they could get out at that time, but then the icebergs move. And the next day we were looking at the same channel. There was no iceberg there anymore. It was gone. It had moved out.
Did they talk about the tidal shift in around the islands, particularly?
No, I did not hear anything about that.
No. Well, it's an interesting phenomenon because what about, did you hear any calving of those big icebergs?
We heard some calving when we were out walking around on land. We didn't hear any calving when we were actually in the water. And we did not see any calving.
Just like thunder rumbling on the horizon, eh?
Exactly. We just heard the noise, and the guide said that's what the noise is.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you for the interesting presentation and for doing it. Yeah.
You're very welcome.
VJ, do you have a question?
Yeah, Paul, thank you very much for your beautiful presentation. And I love the pictures that you took, many of them. Just wanted to ask you, is the cruise is the best way to go? Or are there any land tours would you recommend?
So one of my brothers had done a land tour before.
Uh-huh.
So he was in a position to compare his land tour
With that cruise.
where he was driven around by a driver versus this. And he says that the cruise is a much better way
to go around.
to go. It actually turns out to be relatively cheap compared to driving around the place because Iceland is extremely expensive.
Another question I really had was that I think on the cruise, you possibly will have no problem of getting a vegetarian food. But if you are in Iceland itself, possibly it's harder to get a vegetarian food, right?
You know what? I suspect you can get vegetarian food in Iceland if you wish. The food is expensive, but a hot dog at a hot dog stand costs like about $8 or something like that. Everything is very expensive.
But the vegetarian choices are possibly not many.
I don't know. We didn't eat very much on land
Yeah.
because we were a cruise, but I went out for a couple of dinners and I had vegetables with my meals. I'm not vegetarian, but there were vegetables with the meals.
So what about the volcanoes? Are they, lots of them are active still?
Well, there's a very active volcano right now. When we were there was a volcano that was in between eruptions. The Blue Lagoon had been closed before, it had been reopened. And then 3 or 4 days after we went into the Blue Lagoon, it was closed because of volcanic activity.
Volcanoes, okay.
So there is a very active geothermal area, a very active volcanic area.
And
I wanted to see a volcano erupting.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to see
erupt when I
volcanoes
was
going.
there.
Yeah. I mean, another question I really had was that with the previous person also asked about the Iceland, about the icebergs melting or
Well,
what would you say?
the glaciers are melting. Just as they are, I think, all around the world. The glaciers are melting faster than people think they should.
But that's interesting when you say that it was much warmer in 900s and compared to now, and it's getting cooler and cooler, and now it's warmer again because of the climate change. So are they quite active in climate change?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
But I must say that I had assumed before I went there that Iceland was always a very frigid place. I was quite shocked when the guy told us that no, when his great grandfather arrived there, Iceland was actually a very pleasant climate, and actually it was considered to be ideal for growing stuff, which is part of the reason why they said they'll settle there. It was a good place to be.
Good. Thank you.
Richard, do you have a question?
I have a comment, if I may. In answer to Vijay's question about other ways of seeing Iceland, in 2017, Helen and I and another couple drove around Iceland. And I can't comment on whether how that compares with a cruise or with being driven by a driver. But I have to say, we really enjoyed it. It's one of the greatest travel experiences that I've had. We used a tour company, and there are a number of them that planned the itinerary for us, arranged accommodation, mostly in fairly low scale, in some cases, very small bed and breakfasts, provided the car, and really looked after us very, very well. We saw many of the same things that Paul saw, and some different things, pretty much several waterfalls every day. Unusual not to have at least one hot pool each day. Many of them were very cheap. Some were very small. None were as elaborate as Blue Lagoon, where we had some interesting adventures, not all of them in the water. So there are alternatives. And if there are people who enjoy driving and enjoy road trips, I would strongly suggest that you look into it. We made our trip in August, and the reason for that was that prices dropped at the end of July or in early August. So we chose to drive around in August, but the weather was fine. So I thought I would contribute that to the discussion. And thank you, Paul. Your photos and your description of the trip were, as always in your talks, were really, really good. Thank you.
And Richard, did you arrange the tour from here, from Canada, or from there?
No, the tour company was in Iceland. We flew from Vancouver on Iceland Airways. Takes about 9 hours, I think, nonstop. And we arranged our own we spent 5 days in, excuse me, in Reykjavik. But we dealt with the tour company through their website. We had quite a choice. It was kind of interesting in one respect that our traveling companions wanted a very rural, low-key experience, so they chose a travel company that offered that. But by the time we got there, they changed their name to Hey Iceland, completely changed their target demographic to young adventurers, but the trip was pretty much the same. So
Good.
Anyway.
Thank you.
Paul, could I ask, does Icelandic Air, or whatever they're called, still offer a 2-day stay over on a trip from Canada to Europe, which they fly fairly regularly?
Yes, they do. So that is an option if you just wanted to stop over in Iceland for a couple of days. Apparently, the prices to get to Europe are much cheaper than going to Europe directly with other airlines.
Right. Thank you.
And I have a colleague who, at the same time that we were there, he went on a bicycle tour of Iceland. So, and he enjoyed that very much also. So that was a different kind of option. I know that some people who have been on a travel group are into cycling, and apparently that's something that can also be easily done when you're in Iceland.
Yeah, good.
Just one more comment on driving. In the 10 days, we drove right around the island, and in the same way Paul did it, his cruise ship. So 10 days, 12 days, 14 days, plenty of time to drive right around Iceland and stop in lots of places on the way.
Good.
Paul, I have one more question. You showed us those prefab buildings, and that led me to wonder, is there no construction industry in Iceland, or very little?
I suspect that there is very little. There is very little type of wood that you would use for building.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if you their natural wood that they have there, these birch trees that don't grow very high. They've now created some forests of the type of evergreens that we tend to grow in British Columbia, but they're relatively small, relatively new forests that they have managed to plant up and create. But I don't know what their building industry is like. I mean, they're obviously building massive buildings like the Harpa that we looked at. It's a big building, and it's not made out of wood. And that is not prefab at all. We were talking about a little town in a remote area of Iceland on the coast where there was nothing to build with. So they brought in these already ordered, they ordered the buildings came, they put them up.
Okay, thanks. Are there any final questions? Okay. So once again, Paul, I want to thank you, and can you close us out for the term?
Yes, thank you. Before we leave, I would like to let you know that we have one extra session this year. We're going to have a session in July the 17th. Kate Tesh is going to talk to us about her trip to Newfoundland. And we thought that it was timely with all the travel within Canada to let that happen now rather than wait until after the summer recess. So I hope that many of you and people who are still in town at that time will be able to join and hear about a recent trip to Newfoundland. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing some of you back in July. And thanks, Nancy, for hosting the meeting today.
Sure. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Paul.
you.